Leona and Blitz were supposed to be mids? Well, Leona wasn't. Leona is explicitly designed to be a support. That's why her passive doesn't work for her. Right? Like, Leona's passive quite literally says, this only is good if you have a teammate around, right? Blitzcrank, though, was designed at a time when, like, we didn't have roles. Like, Blitzcrank wasn't designed to go to a lane. Blitzcrank was designed to be a fighter. And that's what he was designed to be.
How exactly is top lane weak? They don't get ranged melee modifiers like AD carry while getting multiple stats and items while being durable and strong. So top lane is not always weak, but in the majority of metas in League of Legends, top lane tends to be the lowest impact role compared to the other roles. Jungle and mid tend to compete for the highest impact. AD carry is usually pretty close to the second impact. It's usually fighting with mid for second impact. And then top lane is very typically at the bottom of all the roles for their ability to impact the game and, pop off. Despite that, top lane is a very fun role and it's very, very popular. So a lot of times people will come in here and they'll be like, August, when are you buffing top lane? And one of my responses is always, one of the hard parts about buffing top lane is buffing top lane in ways that top laners would enjoy. Because a lot of the ways you could make top lane have more impact in the game are also things that top laners don't actually want to do as much. It's like I can make top laners have more impact by making them better at roaming, as an example, but like a lot of top laners don't want to roam. They want to go top and have an honorable 1v1, right? So it's a challenge there. In regards to when bring back seeing who wants to surrender, that's one of those things that I would argue we should probably never bring back. It only creates negativity. What reason would you want to have for knowing who wants to surrender except to flame them for wanting to surrender? Maybe there's other reasons you'd want to know who wants to surrender, but like the problem with showing people who wants to surrender is the overwhelming outcome of doing that tends to be negative because like, okay, I know this guy wants to forfeit, great. What are the positive outcomes of knowing that guy wants to forfeit versus the negative is basically kind of the idea there. And so there's certain things that showing people, well, yes, it gives you information, does not give you information that can create positive interactions. It will often like trend towards negative interactions. And that's the danger of like, say, showing who wants to surrender. So I would say that's something that's probably not too valuable to bring back compared to the other things that you were talking about.
One of the things we often do in champion design is like, as we get closer to release, we'll cut things off of characters that they might not need. Fun fact for all of you, more bullshit. Senna used to slow on her basic attacks. And you might be like, but what about Ashe? And yeah, I should have thought of that before I put a slow on Senna's basic attacks. Anyways, that's something we cut before she shipped. Have I thought of making Senna's passive adaptive so she could use it more if she goes full enchanter? Well, the point of Senna having an enchanter and an AD build is that going one gives up the other. And so making her passive adaptive, I think what the end result would be is that just one build comes out on top and the other one becomes bad. And so by giving Senna good healing ratios and not good attack damage, what we're basically saying is Enchanter Senna gives up sustained attack damage for really, really good utility. And AD Senna gives up as good of utility as she might have in exchange for being, 75% of an AD carry in the support role. And so like the point of that is that she has two viable builds that have different strengths and different weaknesses. I have a question. How do you balance corporate expectations versus passion for the game that you are working on? Because at the end of the day, League's a business, right? So this is a great question. And of course, it's probably a little sticky of a topic for me to talk about. I can give you a personal take on it, though. And that is the root of the statement at the end of the day, League is a business, right? It's a statement that is like making the assumption that like businesses need to make money, right? Naturally. I think there's a lot of ways that a business can go around doing that, however. And so there is the Bobby Kotick way of doing things, which is just squeeze value out of your players and your employees, not really caring how happy any of them are, And then you can say, oh, well, at the end of the day, it's a business. It needs to make money, right? Like, that's one way to do things. I personally and subscribe to a different way of thinking about how a business makes money. And that is the idea that if you make a good game that lots of people really like, and you make things that they find to be highly valuable and worth their money, then the end result is you make money. That's my personal take on it. And so sometimes I think people can go very too far in either end. On one end, there's the general, I think the flawed assumption that making money is purely an exploitative practice, and the only way to make money from a game or from players or whatever is to exploit them. I think that's ridiculous. I think that's like way too far and not really true. And then I think something that's also probably unrealistic is the idea that like you should never sell anything because selling things is not okay, and you should just like, that's not something you should do. You shouldn't make money. And it's like, well, you do have to pay your employees. There is some degree of money a business needs to make. And so the way I generally tend to feel about it is there are things you can do that are very strong long-term value bets for your players and will make your players happy and will make your players enjoy the game. And when you have a game that players are happy and enjoy, the end result of that is that they're probably interested in spending on it to some degree, especially if you make things that they can buy that they also deeply enjoy and deeply value. And so I generally believe that you can sell something to a player and make both the business and the player happy, if that makes sense. Whereas it's very easy, I think, to get into the camp of selling anything is bad, which I think is maybe unrealistic, or the camp of selling things should be exploitative, which I think is also just not the case. I would reference a lot of early decisions that Riot made in the early days that ended up working out, possibly by luck. Like, there's always some degree of luck when you make a game that, pops off as much as League of Legends. But a lot of the early decisions, from the early days of Riot, were often made with a desire to create long-term value. The idea that, like, hey, if we just make something that people love, over the long term, League will prosper, and over the long term, people will be happy, and therefore, want to buy skins and things like that. Esports is an example of this, actually. League of Legends being this giant esport, it's like a lot of that came from just an original thought of like, well, hey, if it's cool to play a game competitively, and then like you have this really aspirational, like professional side of it, that's just the long-term result of that is going to be like a very compelling space for that game to be in that people will really enjoy being part of. Right. And so an example of something I think does this actually very, very well in terms of like the idea of making things that make money but also being high value, I think is Valorant. Obviously I'm a little Riot pilled, right? But I think Valorant does a great job with its gun skins. Because are they kind of expensive? Yes, they are. But I think the value you get from having many of those skins in Valorant is very, very, very high. Because in Valorant, those skins are so... I think one of the things that they do really well, aside from just being high quality and looking really cool and having really cool effects, is Valorant skins are so shareable. And so when I buy a skin, that means all my friends get that skin. And that means if I'm, interested in someone who's playing Valorant, I can share that skin with them. And if I kill someone who has a skin that I like in Valorant, I can take their skin, and now it's my skin for the rest of the round. And so I think Valorant, CSGO, games like that, one of the things that's really cool about the skins in those games is just the social benefit you get from having them in terms of how you can share them with others. And so I would say, yeah, generally, personally, I'm a fan of Valorant skins in that My personal take on them is that they are, yes, we sell skins, but also they tend to be very, very high value and very, very, people who have them tend to be very happy with having them. And so that's like kind of like the win-win that I'm talking about here. In regards to being a game dev, though, I think one of the things a lot of game devs grapple with, because the original question was like, what about your passive passion for the job versus corporate interests, right? I think one of the things a lot of game devs grapple with, including myself, is when you're on a project that feels like it's not necessarily good for whatever reason. Like maybe it's not good for the long term, or maybe it feels like it's not actually being made with the right intentions in mind, things like that. And this can happen at many, many companies, including Riot, where I generally am most passionate about projects that I work on where it's like, I know that players are going to love this thing, regardless of whether it costs money or not. So like, as an example, Swarm, as an example, we didn't charge anybody any money for that, right? And it ended up being really, really fun. And I was like very passionate to work on it because I knew people were going to love it. Now, imagine, I'm not saying we would do this. I'm just using this as a hypothetical, right? Imagine we were making Swarm and we did what Vampire Survivors did with it, where we charged $2 to play Swarm, right? And so it's like, hey, Swarm came out and it's this game that we made and it's $2. Again, not saying we would do that. This is purely a hypothetical. I would still, as a dev, be very passionate and excited to work on that project because I would be working on something that I knew players would really enjoy, and I knew that even if it cost $2, it would be worth it, if that makes sense. That's what I'm getting at with it. So again, Swarm, we made it to be free because we just wanted something that people would really like doing and have fun with. But as a dev, my passion really just connects to, am I making something that I think people are going to love? So like, as an example, if I was a skins artist, I'm not, so I can't really say how skins artists feel, but like from my personal space in my mind, if I was a skins artist, I personally would be really excited to work on like Star Guardian skins. Because even though that's something, hey, we're selling to players, I know that, my personal passions is I love Star Guardian stuff. And then secondarily, I know that like if I was working on a Star Guardian skin, that would be something that a lot of people would like genuinely really, really, really love, right? Like people would genuinely see that and be like, oh my God, I want that. That's so cool. That's so fun. That's so pretty, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of how my personal passions align when thinking about, stuff I'm making is like, is the stuff I'm making something that is going to make a lot of players happy? And like, to me, that's what's really important.